Hello, everybody. It is your Peacekeeper coming at you with a new How to Play series. The last How to Play series was the US Destroyer tree. This one is the German Battleship tree as promised. Yes, the Germans are coming. So prepare yourself as we embark on yet another journey. Before we begin talking about the Nassau, which is the very first in the German battleship tree, we must first talk about German battleship captain skills. To do that, I will go to my Bismarck captain. The first 15 points should be spent thusly. Point number 1 goes into basic firing training. And the reason for this has to do with how the German battleships play. German battleships are great brawlers. As a result, they also have very good secondaries. So let's buff the rate of fire of our secondaries. It also helps with the anti-aircraft defense, which the Germans are no slouch at, in fact besting many of the US battleships all the way up until Tier 7. So basic firing training for point number 1. Number 2, expert marksman. That is a staple for pretty much every battleship tree. The Tier 3 captain skill, superintendent, for those extra charges, be it fighters later on, heals at the early game, sonar eventually. Yes, you heard that correctly, sonar. The Bismarck, the Frederick de Grosse, and the Grosse Kurfürst all have sonar, aka hydroacoustic. The 4th tier skill, advanced firing training. Again, we want to boost the range of all of our secondaries. This will boost it by 20%. It also boosts our anti-aircraft firing range by 20% as well. Combining all of the things together with BFT and AFT, you get some pretty potent secondary ranges. The Bismarck's default range with those upgrades, as well as all the secondary upgrades for the ship itself, is 10.1 kilometers. Yes, 10.1 kilometers. Yamato fans, eat your heart out. That is the exact same firing range as the Yamato secondaries. The 5th point for the 5th captain skill, 5th tier captain skill, we'll go into, as you guessed it, manual fire control for the secondaries. We really want to reduce the dispersion of those secondaries to bring them in and make them more accurate. I will tell you right now that the secondaries on German battleships are plenty potent, as is, even without it, but it just helps that much more. From there, we have really 3 different paths that we can take. We can take a survivability path, we can take the troll path, which is the carrier troll path, which is manual AA, or we can take a little bit more of a balanced path. With regards to the survivability path, you're going to end up taking High Alert first, and then on your 19th point, Basics of Survivability. High Alert giving you, obviously, that quicker reload time for your Damage Control Party consumable, which is the Stop the Fires and Flooding Right Now skill. That comes in handy. And then, of course, Basics of Survivability, which reduces the time of flooding and fire, as well as repairing of various other things. That is the survivability line. The German battleships, unfortunately, have a high propensity to start on fire, so some of you might be interested in taking fire prevention. I will tell you right now, you're going to have to end up choosing another Tier 2 skill, and none of them are really all that useful. You could choose 2 Tier 1s, but I don't know. Anyway, moving on. The CV Troll version is manual fire control for AA. That gives you both manual fire control abilities. This adds 100% average damage to all of your anti-aircraft guns larger than 85 millimeters, which for most of the upper tier German battleships is going to be pretty much all of your anti-aircraft guns, except for the Flakvierlings. The other option that you can take for the more balanced loadout is Vigilance. Instead of taking High Alert, Vigilance is going to allow you to acquire torpedoes from further away because you're a brawler. That helps you plan your maneuvering a little bit better. Sonar helps, and I really think at the upper tiers, Sonar actually ends up playing out a little bit better. It's up to you how you want to take that. Me personally, I'm going to end up going down the survivability route. The last point on that build, obviously, is going to be basics of survivability. Alright, well, let's talk about the Nassau. Unfortunately, I made a bit of a mistake after I played the game. I didn't keep a hold of her to make this portion of the video. Oops. So we're going to do this with one that I haven't purchased. A little bit of history on the Nassau class of battleships. Yes, it is a full class of battleships. There were 4 of them built: the Nassau, Westfalen, Rhineland, and Posen, which served from 1909 to 1919 in the Kaiserliche Marine, aka the Kaiser's Navy. All 4 of them participated in the Battle of Jutland and survived with little to no damage. 2 of them received small caliber hits, like a couple of small caliber hits, and the other 2 were not hit at all. None of them were hit by major caliber guns. After World War I, all 4 were held back from the Scapa Flow scuttling of the German Navy, which was very famous, in which the König, Kaiser, and a couple of the other, Bayern was another one, in which they sailed them into Scapa Flow and scuttled them in there after the war. And as a result of that scuttling, all 4 of the Nassau's were later given to the victorious Allied powers as replacement for scuttled ships. The Nassau herself was given to the Japanese, Westfalen and Posen were given to the British, and Rhineland was scrapped immediately. In-game! Well, I suppose we should talk about her in-game stats. This will be kind of fun, so bear with me. In terms of survivability, fully upgraded, she has 3,500, we'll call it 35,400 hit points. Very, very weak torpedo protection, which is a common trend amongst the German battleship line. In terms of main battery, her main battery consists of 6 turrets with 2 guns each. They are 11-inch guns. They have a firing range of 10.1 kilometers. Look at that secondary range. We've got a number of 88s, literally, on board. There are 16 of them. There's also 12 150 millimeter guns as well. I should stand corrected. 10.1 kilometers is the main battery firing range. Yep, 10.1 is the main battery firing range. And in terms of anti-aircraft, it does exist. That's very weak. You get 488s that are dual-purpose mounts. She does have a maximum speed of 20 knots, a rudder shift time of 11.2 seconds, and a turning circle of 510 meters. Her detection range is 10.1 kilometers from surface and 8.3 from the air. In terms of upgrades, there are 2 upgrade slots on the Tier 3 Nassau. I will go to my Bismarck to explain them. It's going to be Main Armaments Mod 1. It'll be the first slot and the third slot on this guy. Main Armaments Mod 1 over the other ones, for obvious reasons. You can read the list there. And then Damage Control Systems Mod 1. Both of those are going to make the Nassau just a little bit better. You know, those upgrades aren't going to be a huge improvement. But anyway, as I was saying, you know, at the first part of this, German battleships are brawlers. And to really brawl, you have to get in close. And by close, I'm not talking like, okay, 10 kilometers is pretty close once you get into the later tier stuff. 10 kilometers past the Tier 3 Nassau is pretty far. I'm just going to be honest with you. These ships need to really operate in that 5 to 10 kilometer range to be most effective. The Nassau needs to get as close as freaking possible because the guns are just shotguns. If you've ever played the U.S. battleship line and played the Wyoming, they're worse. If you didn't think that was possible, it is. They are on par with the Kawachi. Speaking of the Kawachi, you'll notice that the Nassau's gun arrangement is very reminiscent of the Kawachi. You do have the 2 in front and then 2 on each side and you can only fire 4 per broadside. The turrets take forever to traverse, so it's not something that you can kind of do the wag and forth, back and forth to get them on target. That doesn't work out terribly well. Also, I should let you all know that the German battleships, most of them have plenty of front-end bow armor, but it seems like they take a lot of white damage from guns. And that's because, you know, if you're not angled properly with them, you'll never get close enough to use your guns. Thankfully, the German battleships have a lot of belt armor to them. They also have a very advantageous armor profile that we'll talk about here in just a second. However, the Nassau especially, it is important to angle yourself. You don't want to be going bow on because, as you can see, the fore-end plating is very thin. The deck plating is very thin. As a result, these ships will take a lot of damage if shells impact the upper portion of your front of your deck. If you can give yourself a little bit of angle, you can bring in the heavier portions of your belt. That will provide the best damage reduction possible, with chances to flat out mitigate it all entirely. Of course, if they're shooting HE at you, none of that really matters. But let's talk about that advantageous layout of the armor. To do that, we need that. To do that, I'm going to hide a bunch of things in the armor viewer. If you've not messed around with the armor viewer, you really should. German battleships, starting from the very beginning, get what they call a turtleback armor scheme. The turtleback armor scheme, as you can see here, involves your Citadel hitbox, which is this lower box, plus your belt armor. But you'll notice how the armor itself is sloped here, flat on the top and then sloped on the other side. Your main belt is still very thick. But what happens is when a shell hits this belt, if it penetrates, it has to also penetrate this plate here that is angled. And the armor thickness on that is going to be 58 millimeters, and it's angled pretty heavily. So when that shell comes in, it's going to have to get through this belt. It's also going to have to get through this armored deck plating before it'll ever get to the Citadel. What that means is that German battleships are almost impossible to Citadel. It is possible. It requires long range and high penetrating shells. Pro tip, if you're in the North Carolina, distances of about 15 kilometers on broadside Bismarcks and Tirpitz will definitely get you Citadels. Not frequently, but you'll get them. So this is a trend that you will see with all of the German battleships. There's a better profile view of the turtleback armor scheme. This is extremely advantageous in that you'll never take lots of Citadels if you go broadside. However, like all other battleships, when you go broadside, you present the largest target for AP shells to hit. And the downside to this armor profile is that you will take a lot of white or normal damage. That being the 50% normal penetration damage from AP shells. You may not take a Citadel, but you'll take 5,000 to 10,000 or more damage from full broadsides when you are broadside to other battleships. It is downright punishing at upper tiers to be broadside. So there is still a severe disincentive to being broadside to other targets. It's just not from the form of a massive Citadel hit. Also, because these guys are very, very, very good brawlers, that means that their guns are not particularly accurate. In fact, we can see here 156 meters. I don't think that improves. No, it gets worse with the range upgrade to 165. 165 millimeters upgraded. I'd have to go back and look at the South Carolina's stats, but I can tell you right now that these guns are very inaccurate. That dispersion number doesn't tell you the whole story about how these guns operate. That's why I said you really need to get in close. The upside to getting in close is that your secondaries have a 4-kilometer firing range, and I don't think that improves with the whole upgrade. Nope. At 4 kilometers, your secondaries start opening up, and your secondaries actually can be a very significant portion of the damage that you do, especially once you get to the upper tiers when your secondary range starts going further and further out. Like I said, starting with the Bismarck, the Tier 8, and up, your secondaries go out to 10.1 kilometers without the secondary flag, 10.6 width. And with manual fire control on them suckers, they hit all the time and they do a lot of damage, especially if you're really getting in there and brawling with those ships. It also makes for a very nice fireworks show. I mean, that's one thing that we can't argue with. It's very pretty to see them things go off, even if they're not particularly effective. But anyway, that's enough about the ship stats. We've covered everything that we need to cover with the upgrades, with the captain skills. The only thing left to do is show you a battle video. This battle video is right around, I want to say, like 56,000 damage, which for Tier 3 is quite a lot. But let's cut to that video. Alright, in this battle, we get some brawling on. Of course, as I said in the first part of this video, the dispersion on these things is very, very poor for its tier. As a result, it ends up basically shotgunning the whole friggin' time. That's a little annoying to me, but it's something you'll get used to, and thankfully this grind is not a huge grind, and therefore it's not a huge problem, so you just kind of gotta push through it. The Kaiser and later the Koenig afterwards don't have nearly this many problems with dispersion. They are at least tolerable at all ranges, whereas this, it just does some weird things, you know? Anyway, our first target of the day is going to be a Dresden. We're going to put a shot out on him. He's going bow in. You got to pay attention to our DDs. He's coming bow in, but he's going to open up for us a little bit, and we'll be able to put some rounds down at him. Now, you'll see that the gun turret, there's that dispersion I was talking about. In fact, I only hit him once for overpen for 720 damage. He wasn't completely broadside, but, you know, it's the principle of the thing. The guns do shoot very flat and have a pretty good shell velocity, being 11-inch guns versus 12-inch guns for the other countries at this tier. That tends to help. So you don't need massive leads in order to accomplish your intended goal. Now there's a pretty big hit off there, Nassau. For some odd reason, Dispersion RNGesus decided to bless me with a tight shot grouping, and then decided not to. Ow. Ow. As you can see, there's that big white damage that I was talking about. The German battleships take a lot of it because of the way the armor scheme is laid out. You still have a lot of belt armor, so that's not the issue. But here's another example of why you got to pay attention to where you're aiming and what's close to you. Obviously, this Novik is way too close to me, and I shot anyway, thinking that they would go over. Nope. Thankfully, not a whole lot of damage to him. And we'll be able to continue on. Here's another example of the bad dispersion. Now, battleships aren't going to be able to normally shoot that well going there, too. We did manage to get 2 hits for about 1,500 damage on a lengthwise destroyer, which tells you exactly how much penetration capability the 12-inch guns have. Sorry, not 12-inch, 11-inch guns have. And there are people that will think that, well, they don't penetrate very well. No, they penetrate almost too well. And Dispersion also led the poor St. Louis a little too much. Anyway, as I was saying with the armor, that white damage, you have plenty of deck and bow armor, not deck, but bow armor and belt armor to deflect shots when you're angled. And there's still a lot of it there. I mean, they still have this almost the same amount of armor as most of the other ships in their tier on their belt. It's just that in order to get a Citadel hit on them, you're going to have to go through that internal sloped deck, that turtle back. And that's just very difficult to do. And therefore you take lots of white damage, and because of it, well, these ships don't feel nearly as durable. Occasionally you'll get some just absolutely unbelievably tight shell patterns. That's pretty good, especially considering shooting at 8 kilometers. 2 normal pens for 3,800 damage. By the way, if you're trying to Citadel a St. Louis, the best way to do it is with the South Carolina, firing at near maximum range. It is possible. The St. Louis, its Citadel, sits below the waterline, and it has a, they call it a protected cruiser. The internal armor scheme is basically like a turtleback. And as a result, the only way to penetrate the Citadel on a St. Louis is from range, because of the way that the internal deck is sloped. It looks like, well, it looks like a turtleback, except for it has no belt armor. I haven't gotten to look at the St. Louis in the armor viewer. I'm sure it's modeled, obviously, because of how durable the stupid things are, and particularly overpowered they are for their tier, but there's a pretty big hit, 5,700 damage. Alright, well, we got a South Carolina and a Nassau trying to mate over there, which is really, really awkward. Incoming shells from South Carolina. Those 12-inch shells do hurt, so we got to pay attention to them. We want to make sure that we stay angled to whatever it is that we are attacking. In this case, it's going to be the Nassau and South Carolina. Unusually tight dispersion. Let him a little too much, but I'll take 5,500 damage. I will gladly take 5,500 damage. That is better than nothing. And here you can see how angling is going to mitigate a lot of the damage. Most of the damage that you're seeing, that 810 damage that I just took, stems from the hits to the, I don't want to call it the superstructure, because there really isn't a superstructure, but to that top deck, which has less armor on it than the belt itself does. But definitely want to keep yourself angled and take perfect opportunities to bring all of your guns to bear. You don't want to go full broadside in these things. You will get punished. It does hurt a lot to do so, but you got to turn around. You got to turn around, and that is a perfect example of why this ship is so frustrating. How is it that not more than 30? Well, it's probably about a minute before this, I can shoot at a St. Louis at the same distance and get a super tight dispersion, and then all of a sudden it's like they loaded the friggin' guns with forks and decided to shoot at them with that. And then the next salvo, you get that! I mean, I'm all about having dispersion to balance out Battleship damage values, but the dispersion, the chances of getting these just really weird and wonky dispersion numbers is just strange. There's a pretty decent shot grouping. Another 5K, 4,400 taken off. Now we're going to go ahead and start charging back in. And the reason for that is because our team is finally here. Now granted, it's only a cruiser and I up here, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to start turning back towards our friendlies. I'm going to go ahead and shoot this other side's guns, which is one of the small advantages that these things have. Again, I don't know where that shot was, what caused that. Nice little bounce there. But, again, the dispersion, like, you'll get one that's all of a sudden it's just spot on and perfect, and then all of a sudden it's like, what the heck just happened there? Well, we're going to go ahead and keep closing the distance. We are a brawler. Brawling is good for us. Go ahead and shoot at this Nassau since he's presenting a very juicy target. And we are going to bounce South Carolina shells. Bounce, bounce. 5,700 taken off the Nassau. And as we continue to close the distance here, we want to make sure that we get the South Carolina taken care of before we get anything else taken care of. Normally I wouldn't suggest taking that shot, however, as you can see it worked out. At these low tiers you can take a little bit more bow-on shots, especially with these high-velocity guns, and it will still do a pretty good chunk of damage. Secondaries are finally opening up for the fireworks show. What? The Novik killed him. What? Alright. Well, that's fine. We got ourselves a Nassau over here that we'll go shoot. This is what I'm talking about with dispersion. If you guys are looking to do more damage at these lower tiers, you want to be aiming just above the water line. And the reason for that is look at how many of those shots fell short and long. I don't think I would have gotten the 3 hits that I did get had I not been able to do that. But bounce another shell. Keep bouncing, keep bouncing. Ah, I didn't quite get that salvo off, but 57,883 damage. We're going to go ahead and skip a bit to the battle loading screens. Alright, as you can see, there's our damage screen, our team score, 744 base XP. You can see where we took all that damage. And there's the credit screen. Anyway, this has been the Tier 3 Nassau, the German battleship, and the first in our German battleship How to Play series. As with always, guys, like, comment, and subscribe. And if you guys have any suggestions on how to improve the channel, I am all ears. Throw them down in the comments. This has been your Peacekeeper. Thanks for watching.